The city hums outside, a low current of life moving in the distance, but inside your room there is nothing but stillness. No conversations, no notifications buzzing for your attention, no pressure to perform, just silence. The kind of silence that feels less like an absence and more like a presence. Maybe you know this moment. The door closes behind you, the noise fades, and suddenly your chest loosens, your mind settles, and a quiet thought rises from somewhere deep inside. This is where I can finally breathe. For some people, this feeling is confusing. They step into an empty room and sense loneliness. You step into the same room and feel something entirely different. You feel at home. Have you ever wondered why silence comforts you more than conversation does? Why time alone feels nourishing instead of empty? Why you come alive not in the crowd, but in the quiet? There's a chance you've been misunderstood for that. Many of us have. Because the world often treats quiet like a warning sign and solitude like a problem to fix. But what if the truth is more subtle? What if the moments when you're alone aren't signs of disconnection at all, but signs that your mind is finally allowed to rest? This is where our exploration begins. Not with loneliness, but with the strange, steady peace that rises when everything else falls silent. A peace that doesn't push the world away. A peace that invites you back to yourself. When silence feels like a kind of home, it isn't because life has pushed you into a corner. It's because something in you recognizes the value of stepping away from the constant noise that surrounds daily existence. Most people move through their days pulled outward, reacting to conversations, expectations, responsibilities, and the steady pressure to stay connected. But the mind has its own rhythm, and it doesn't always sync with the rhythm of the world. In the quiet, that inner rhythm finally has room to be heard. Solitude offers something subtle that many overlook. When you're no longer managing how you appear, when you're no longer responding to the energy of others, your thoughts begin to settle. What once felt tangled becomes clearer. What once felt urgent loses its sharpness. This isn't withdrawal, it is recalibration. You are not stepping back from life, but stepping closer to your own experience of it. Psychologists describe this shift as a movement from external attention to internal awareness. When your mind is no longer occupied by the demands of the outside world, a different network comes online, the one responsible for reflection, memory, and meaning. Some call it the brain's resting state, but anyone who has felt its presence knows there is nothing passive about it. The mind is working, quietly and deeply, sorting through emotions you didn't have space to process, reorganizing thoughts that were half-formed, and reconnecting you with parts of yourself that often get buried beneath noise. This is why solitude doesn't feel empty. It feels clarifying. It offers a sense of relief that is hard to articulate, the relief of returning to a mental space where you don't have to be anything for anyone. You simply are. And in that simplicity, the mind finds balance again. People who feel at home in solitude are not avoiding connection. They are restoring the parts of themselves that make connection meaningful in the first place. They understand, often intuitively, that stepping into quiet is not an escape from life, but a way of preparing to meet it honestly. Solitude becomes the place where clarity grows, where emotional weight lightens, and where the self slowly rises to the surface, steady and unforced. For many people who feel naturally drawn to solitude, this comfort did not appear suddenly. It usually has roots, quiet ones that formed long before they were fully understood. Some discovered early on that the world around them could feel overwhelming, filled with emotional tones that shifted unpredictably. In those spaces, silence became a refuge long before it became a preference. Others simply noticed that their minds worked differently. They processed the world inwardly, absorbing details, emotions, and impressions with an intensity that demanded time alone to settle. Still others found that, while they valued connection, they needed quiet in order for their inner life to stay coherent. Regardless of the path that led them there, the result was the same. Solitude became associated with clarity, steadiness, and a sense of returning to one's true center. Psychologists often describe this as a form of self-regulation. The nervous system continuously measures its own limits, responding to overstimulation not with avoidance, but with the instinct to restore balance. When life feels too loud, the body itself seems to guide a person towards stillness, as if saying, "This is where you can breathe again." Over time, this becomes intuitive. Solitude shifts from a place of escape into a place of restoration. It becomes the setting where the mind can sort through tensions that were never fully acknowledged, and where emotions can settle instead of overflowing. In this sense, choosing to be alone is not a rejection of the world, but an understanding of one's internal ecology. There is also a deeper psychological dimension at work. People who feel at home in their own company tend to develop a refined sense of inner awareness. They can detect subtle emotional shifts, recognize early signs of stress, and understand what they need to feel grounded. This awareness grows slowly, shaped by experience, but it becomes one of their greatest strengths. It allows them to stay connected to themselves, even when the world grows chaotic. It gives them the capacity to pause and reflect, rather than react impulsively. And perhaps most importantly, it helps them maintain a connection to their values, instead of being pulled in every direction by outside expectations. This is why solitude, for them, is not a void. It is a landscape. It is the quiet interior space where thoughts that were scattered throughout the day finally arrange themselves into something coherent. It is where emotional truths rise to the surface without needing to fight for attention. It is where the self becomes visible again, without distortion and without pressure. When someone reaches this point, solitude is no longer something they simply like. It becomes an essential form of honesty, the moment when they meet themselves without the noise of the world shaping their identity. As solitude becomes a familiar terrain, something else begins to unfold, something that goes far beyond comfort. People who spend intentional time alone often notice that their inner world grows clearer and more organized. The clutter that accumulates throughout the day, the unresolved feelings, the competing priorities, the fragments of unfinished thoughts, all begin to settle. This settling is not passive. It is a cognitive and emotional recalibration. When the mind is no longer pulled outward, it finally has room to process everything it absorbed, sometimes unconsciously, sometimes at a pace faster than the person could handle in real time. This is one of the reasons solitude strengthens emotional clarity. When you sit with yourself long enough, distractions fall away. The mind can confront what it usually avoids. You begin to recognize what truly drains you, what restores you, what aligns with your values, and what quietly violates them. You understand which emotions arise from genuine needs and which are merely reactions to external pressure. Over time, this kind of reflection becomes a form of internal guidance, a way of navigating life with more intention and less noise. It is not that solitude makes everything easier. It is that solitude makes everything more honest. There is also a neurological rhythm behind this shift. When you're alone and the external demands fade, the brain activates a network responsible for synthesis, imagination, and meaning-making. This is the mental state where connections form naturally, where creative ideas surface without force, where memories are integrated rather than pushed aside. Many people notice this when they take a quiet walk or sit in a room without distractions. Suddenly an insight appears, or a problem that felt impossible finds a direction. These moments are not accidental. They are the result of the mind finally having the space to think in its own language. Creativity often emerges here too, not just in the artistic sense, but in the broader sense of problem-solving, innovation, and emotional inventiveness. In solitude, the mind is free to explore without judgment, without interruption, without the need to conform. It is a space where mental freedom becomes possible, where thoughts can take shape in their most authentic form. This is one reason many deeply reflective people rely on quiet time. It is not a luxury. It is a necessary environment for their mind to function fully. Beyond creativity, solitude strengthens psychological independence. When a person becomes comfortable with their own company, they no longer need constant stimulation or external validation to feel steady. Their emotional life no longer depends on the unpredictable currents of other people's moods and expectations. Instead, they develop an internal steadiness that allows them to engage with the world from a place of stability rather than need. This independence does not diminish their capacity for connection. In fact, it often improves it. People who are grounded within themselves can form relationships that are more genuine because they are not seeking to fill an emptiness. They connect out of clarity, not desperation. This is the quiet power of healthy solitude. It reshapes not only how you feel, but how you think, how you choose, how you move through the world. It shifts your relationships, not by creating distance, but by anchoring you more firmly in your own truth. In this way, solitude is never just about being alone. It is about becoming someone who can meet life with a sense of calm, intelligence, and depth that only grows stronger the more you learn to listen to yourself. Yet even with all its clarity and strength, solitude carries a shadow that often goes unnoticed until it begins to grow. There is a delicate boundary between being alone to restore yourself and being alone to avoid what feels too heavy to face. Most people don't cross this line intentionally. It happens quietly, almost imperceptibly, when the comfort of silence becomes more familiar than the uncertainty of engaging with others. What once felt like a sanctuary can slowly shift into a hiding place. The change usually begins with small signals. You stop reaching out, not because you want space, but because the idea of interaction feels draining. You delay responses even when a part of you longs for connection. You tell yourself that you function better alone, yet the silence no longer feels as warm as it once did. It becomes dense, almost weighted. The mind, which used to settle gracefully in solitude, now loops through the same thoughts without resolution. What once offered clarity begins to cloud your sense of direction. Psychology often describes this shift as a subtle move from regulation to avoidance. Solitude that once helped you rebalance can become a way of shielding yourself from emotional discomfort. You begin to use quiet not to understand your feelings but to escape them. And while the world outside grows silent, the world inside becomes louder. The mind starts treating isolation as a form of safety, even though prolonged isolation can activate the same neural pathways associated with distress. The body interprets disconnection as a threat, not a relief, and the emotional weight slowly intensifies. This is where solitude requires honesty. It asks you to pay attention to the difference between choosing stillness because it nourishes you and retreating into it because everything else feels overwhelming. Healthy solitude leaves you clearer. Unhealthy isolation leaves you smaller, less connected to your own vitality. The difference lies in whether the quiet strengthens you or diminishes you. Recognizing this shift is not a failure. It is an essential part of understanding yourself. Solitude is meant to be a place where you return to balance, not where you disappear from the world. When used with awareness, it prepares you to re-enter life with a steadier presence. But when silence begins to suffocate rather than soothe, it is the mind's way of signaling that what you need is not more distance, but a gentle path back toward connection, even if that path starts with just one small step. When solitude is approached with awareness rather than avoidance, something transformative begins to take shape. The quiet becomes more than a pause. It becomes a mirror that reflects parts of yourself you rarely notice in the rush of daily life. In that mirror, emotions that were pushed aside become visible again, not to overwhelm you but to be understood. The mind starts to piece together experiences that never had space to settle. This process is gentle but profound. It is the beginning of integration, the moment when scattered fragments of your inner world start aligning into something coherent. Healing often starts in these quiet intervals, long before you realize it is happening. When you allow yourself to sit with your emotions instead of outrunning them, they shift. Anger becomes information rather than a storm. Sadness becomes a signal of what matters to you. Fear becomes a guide pointing to something that needs protection. The silence helps you hear these messages clearly. It gives your feelings room to breathe without the pressure to hide or to perform. In this way, solitude becomes a kind of emotional honesty, the space where you are allowed to be unfiltered and true. There is a psychological rhythm behind this. When the mind is not occupied with external stimuli, it turns inward and begins a process of integration. Memories that were loosely held start forming connections. Emotional responses that made little sense begin revealing their origins. You become aware not only of what you feel, but why you feel it. This awareness opens the door to acceptance, and acceptance opens the path to healing. Healing is rarely dramatic. It does not announce itself with clarity or certainty. It often arrives quietly, in the soft recognition that you understand yourself a little better than before. Solitude also teaches self-compassion in a way that is difficult to access when surrounded by noise. You begin noticing the harshness of your inner voice, the expectations you place on yourself, the pressure to always hold everything together. In the quiet, these patterns become clear enough to question, and questioning them creates space for kindness. You learn to offer yourself the patience you often reserve for others. You learn to soften the edges of your own judgment. This shift is subtle but powerful. It forms the foundation of emotional resilience, not by hardening you but by grounding you. As the mind integrates and the heart softens, something deeper becomes possible. You begin to reconnect with the sense of meaning that so easily gets lost in the noise of everyday life. Meaning does not appear fully formed. It emerges gradually, often in moments when everything feels still. A sense of direction arises not from force but from alignment. You begin to sense what matters to you, what deserves your time, what drains you, and where your energy naturally wants to flow. This clarity does not solve every problem, but it gives you a compass, a quiet inner orientation that helps you move through the world with a steadier step. This is the gift of reflective solitude. It does not erase your struggles, it gives them context. It does not promise certainty, it offers understanding. And in that understanding, the self becomes more whole, more grounded, and more capable of facing life with honesty rather than fear. Solitude, when embraced with awareness, becomes a form of returning to yourself, a slow unfolding of inner coherence, and a reminder that healing rarely shouts. More often, it whispers in the spaces where silence finally lets you listen. And as this quiet understanding deepens, solitude begins to reveal something even more meaningful. It shows you that returning to yourself is not an escape from the world, but a way of preparing to re-enter it with greater clarity and intention. When you spend time alone and allow your inner world to settle, you stop carrying the weight of unprocessed emotions into every interaction. You become less reactive and more grounded. You begin to engage with others not out of habit or pressure, but out of choice. Connection becomes something deliberate rather than something demanded. This shift is subtle, yet it changes the quality of your relationships. When you no longer rely on others to confirm your worth, you meet them with steadier presence. You listen more fully because you are not distracted by your own internal noise. You speak more honestly because you are not afraid of losing yourself in the process. Solitude teaches you how to arrive whole. And when you arrive whole, you can connect in ways that feel real rather than performative. It is not about needing fewer people. It is about relating from a place that is more authentic and less dependent on external reassurance. At the same time, solitude helps you recognize the difference between genuine connection and the kind of social interaction that leaves you drained. You learn to sense when you are giving too much of yourself away and when you are ignoring your own needs in order to keep the peace. This awareness strengthens your boundaries, not as walls, but as quiet lines of clarity that protect your emotional balance. With clearer boundaries, connection feels safer, not because you avoid vulnerability, but because you have a stable inner foundation to return to. Eventually, solitude becomes a steady companion rather than a temporary refuge. It is the place you go to listen inwardly, to reflect, to recalibrate, to understand what your life is asking of you next. It offers perspective when your thoughts feel tangled and restores balance when the world becomes overwhelming. Most importantly, it allows you to remain connected to your inner truth, even as you move through spaces that pull your attention outward. In this way, solitude does not distance you from life. It refines the way you participate in it. It gives you a kind of strength that is quiet but unmistakable. The strength of someone who is not easily shaken because they know where they stand within themselves. And when you carry that steadiness into the world, you discover that solitude has not made you colder or more distant. It has made you more present, more thoughtful, and more capable of meeting life with depth rather than distraction.